So, 1 month of ownership and over 1,000 miles later, my 2024 Acura Integra Type-S reaffirms my belief that buying a car is mostly an emotional purchase and not a practical one. And if you're expecting this to be the same old Integra from the days of your youth, well, it's not. But from the steering feel to the shifter and even to the sound of the exhaust, it's a treat. I'm sure by now you've read the articles and watched the video reviews of the Integra Type-S. So what I'll be sharing today is an owner's perspective after 1 month of ownership and over 1,000 miles later. So I happen to be one of the first 200 lucky pre-orders for the Integra Type-S. And so I've been waiting for this car since April of this year, but only took delivery of it about a month ago, which is essentially 3 months later than what Acura originally planned. Now, I shared the entire story in my weekly podcast with my friend Yi, but I'll give you the gist of it later in this video. And let's just say that that whole process wasn't exactly smooth sailing. Since everyone pretty much had so many nice things to say about the FL5 Civic Type R, which this is based off of, I had certain expectations for the Integra Type-S. And even though I've never driven the track-ready Civic Type R, I expected the Integra Type-S to be somewhat of a light performance sedan for the road, basically a regular Integra with a bit more power. But surprisingly, after my initial test drive, I was actually quite surprised at how sporty it felt. Let me just say that it was substantially more than what I had in mind. If the Integra is a small cup of vanilla latte, the Type-S is a tub of double espresso. In short, it exceeded my expectations. It uses the same turbocharged 2.0 four-cylinder engine you get in the Civic Type R, except the Type-S produces an extra 5 horses compared to the Civic, which brings it to 320 horsepower delivered to the front wheels. When I was younger, the thought of that much power being driven to the front wheels instantly conjured up sensations of understeer and ludicrous amounts of torque steer. And yet, I barely feel any of it. I mean, it's there, but just a bit of it. And the Type-S feels very agile and planted around corners. That's in part thanks to the limited slip front differential, but mainly because of the dual-axis front suspension. I really love this idea because, for one, this mitigates torque steer, and two, because they take up more space than a conventional front strut suspension, it gives Acura a very convenient excuse to widen the Integra Type-S to accommodate for the extra girth. And since we're talking about the looks, people like to refer to the Type-S as a more grown-up Type R for the lack of a huge rear spoiler, except that there's nothing grown up about wide fenders, hood vents, an aggressive front fascia, and a triple exhaust system with a resonator delete. And I just absolutely love it. But what's inside is what I think speaks to the more mature demographic that they are referring to. Sure, it's a retrimmed interior of the 11th gen Civic, and people like to make fun of that, which makes me scratch my head because what exactly is wrong with the Civic's interior? As I recall, everyone loved it, including myself. Except that there's a bit more leather trim here and a dash of Alcantara on the seats and the shift boot. But where it does become apparent that this is a dressed up economy car is in the window switches and the headliner. My Kia Telluride has a more posh headliner than this. The seats are a big point of conversation for people shopping between this and the Civic Type R. I personally find the seats in here more than adequate. Absolutely nothing to complain about for my size and my use case. They are supportive and comfortable. My wife even commented that she really likes them. But I understand how people wish that they felt a bit more special like the Type Rs. Honestly though, not once have I wished that I had different seats. The back seats are quite roomy for a car this size, and I'm not bothered at all that they made the Type-S into a 4-seater instead of a 5, because my children's car seats take up that space. Having 2 cup holders in the middle actually works out well for us. The trunk is great. I really do love it. We have filled this with groceries, our kids' soccer gear, and my photo equipment. More than enough space for our day to day. Now, if you've seen my video when I picked up this car from the dealer, you'll remember that the wireless Apple CarPlay feature was extremely slow and laggy. Well, I found out that it was due to the fact that I was using the phone to record and operate wireless CarPlay simultaneously. In a normal scenario, it's fast and responsive as you would expect. The main difference between a wired connection and a wireless one is a slight delay when changing tracks, for example. Otherwise, completely usable and acceptable. The ELS 3D sound system is great, by far the best sounding sound system in any car that I've owned or driven. To me, it really does sound great, but I want you to manage your expectations, especially for something like sound, which can be very subjective. I chose two accessory upgrades for the interior of this car. The first one is the Alcantara steering wheel. The stock perforated steering wheel actually felt nice, but this one makes it feel a bit more special inside. Also, it matches the suede shifter boot. And speaking of the shifter, I went with the titanium shift knob instead of the stock one, half wrapped in leather. I don't worry about it getting hot under the sun since this car is always garage parked. Now, let's talk about the ride quality, the drive, and living with it on a day-to-day basis. As far as ride quality is concerned, the Integra Type-S is firm even in comfort mode. You can really feel the little imperfections of the road. And Sport Plus just makes the ride a little bit more manic. That's the best way I could describe it. I prefer to keep the suspension in comfort, the steering in sport, and the exhaust in Sport Plus. I've programmed my own individual mode in the settings, which gives me comfort for the suspension, sport for the steering, and Sport Plus for the engine and exhaust. Truthfully, I actually do appreciate how the Type-S quiets down when in comfort mode. Whenever I drive around my neighborhood or when I'm picking up my kids from school, the last thing I want is for people to say that I'm going through my midlife crisis. I've read numerous complaints of random rattles and squeaks in the Type-S, and I've not noticed anything in particular. Then again, we all have different tolerances for these sort of things, but personally, I have zero complaints in that department. But maybe because of the fact that the tire noise will actually drown out any of those sound, but we'll get to that in a bit. In terms of the cabin noise, Acura really did an amazing job adding the sound insulation in this car. However, I was really surprised at how loud the tires can get. These Michelin Pilot Sports in particular, I guess are just really loud because that is what you will hear most of the time if you're not playing any music and you're just driving along. Like you can really hear the rumbling sound from the tires. And it's weird because I can see traffic zooming past me, I can barely hear them. But the tires on these things though, a little too loud. The driving feel is where the Type-S really shines. Steering is communicative and shifting gears feels positively engaging. I previously drove a manual WRX and just for comparison, shifting the Type-S feels so much more precise and satisfying. Very close to the way the shifter feels in a Honda S2000 if memory serves me correctly. Now torque steer isn't completely absent, you do get hints of it, but it's not enough to detract from the driving experience or ruin the car dynamically, at least in my opinion. I also love the wide power band of the engine. It's a little crazy for me to think that even at 6th gear, at highway speeds, I can just mash on the pedal and it'll still deliver the power and torque easily. No need to downshift. I think one of the things that I appreciate the most about this car is that you don't have to drive it fast to really enjoy it. I'm driving along one of my favorite twisty roads and I'm just relaxed, but I still enjoy the engagement that this car brings. I can even switch down to comfort mode and makes everything a little bit more relaxed. But if I'm feeling a little bit more spirited, I can go back to individual mode and listen to the exhaust just... That was fun. There is a bit of a turbo lag, but honestly it's so small that I hardly notice it. To me, it just feels very linear. The exhaust isn't overly loud, but you will notice it, and so will the bystanders. No question about it, this car's capabilities far exceed my own as a driver, so on spirited drives, this thing feels extremely planted and confident. The auto rev match feature is something that I surprisingly like. You can turn this feature off if you prefer to do it on your own, but I actually like that it's on. This car does most of the things that I want from a sports sedan, so there's really not a lot that I would like to see improved. However, it doesn't mean that it's perfect. First of all, I think certain trim pieces can be improved, mainly on the window switches and this frustrating piano black center console. I would also like to see a suede headliner. I think that adds so much to a car's interior appeal. The seats are perfectly fine for me, but it would be great to see a more distinct design for the Type S other than just adding an embossed logo on the headrest. Now, I'm not bothered at all by the lack of rear AC vents, but I do want access to a USB charging port for my kids. The armrest storage is adequate, but I found it silly that it doesn't include a tray. I had to buy this one off of Amazon. The backup camera is fine, but I do wish it had a 360-degree camera, especially for a car that's a bit wider. It's not hard to park this car, but I'm just overly cautious when it comes to curb rash. The lack of a memory seat option is kind of silly, but it's not a bother for me personally. What does bother me is the lack of a powered seat for the front passenger side. I mean, come on now. But to me personally, I think the biggest letdown in the features department for the Type S is the absence of HomeLink in the rear view mirror. I do love the frameless design, but it feels a bit backwards having to buy a little garage door opener for an entry-level luxury car in 2023. Oh yeah, and the trunk release button on the remote, completely useless. I really don't know what the point is. This next one isn't a feature, but man, I wish the Integra had a bigger tank. I average about 21 miles per gallon of mixed driving, and I find myself visiting the pump a lot more often just because of the small fuel tank. And yet, despite all of that, all the things that I love about this car just simply outweigh its shortcomings. First off, I love the way it looks. It looks aggressive and unique enough without making it unapproachable. And this is a true story. I've received numerous compliments for my car from complete strangers. Some had no idea what the car even was, but they were just drawn to it somehow. Something I've yet to experience when driving much more expensive European cars. Next, I love the engine and the sound of the exhaust. No explanation required. The sound system is superb for a car in this segment. Wireless Apple CarPlay works fine, and I actually love how responsive and easy it is to use voice commands. The LED lights with auto high beams is a really great feature. Interestingly, I think the last car that I remember having really nice bright lights and a great cutoff was the S2000. I love the practicality of the Integra. Good visibility, great backseat room, and awesome trunk space. I especially love how they've kept common controls as actual physical buttons. They are where you would expect them to be, which means you don't have to relearn anything when operating this car. This next one is kind of minor, but I've really come to appreciate it, and it's the blind spot monitor. And the reason being is the one in my Telluride is so jarring when it goes off. The one in the Type S is noticeable, but it's not overly annoying. I also like that the light flashes and not just light up. Really, the Type S pretty much hits on everything that I would want from a somewhat special day-to-day car. And because you don't see a lot of these, at least for the time being, there is that exclusivity that's kind of in the mix. Even the dealership buying experience, although traditional, was probably one of the nicest I've ever had. Shout out to Ken from Acura of Escondido. As a matter of fact, the only real negative experience I've had was from Acura themselves, unfortunately, at least early on. As I mentioned in the beginning, the pre-order scenario wasn't exactly smooth sailing. My car's production has been delayed numerous times with zero word from Acura HQ. What began as excitement turned to frustration as I saw multiple people take deliveries of their Type S's, even the ones that didn't pre-order. Now, I don't have a problem with them getting the cars out of mine, but to this day, Acura tends to remain silent when it comes to production delays, and I know a lot of people are still waiting for updates from their respective dealers. So my point is, a little heads up goes a long way to keep customers happy and excited. Overall, since taking the Type S home, I've had nothing but great experiences with this car. Even my kids actually enjoy riding in it. So I think Acura truly made something special here, and I feel very fortunate to be able to buy a modern Japanese car today that feels old school in the best way possible. Except this isn't exactly a Japanese car. You see, the Integra Type-S is exclusive to North America, and it was actually built and assembled in Marysville, Ohio, which makes this a very American car. Designed in America, built by Americans, for Americans. This might actually be the most patriotic car that you can buy right now. And if that somehow makes you question its build quality, well, I mean, I have yet to really find any issues, except for a slight fitment issue right here, and a slight paint imperfection right here. Now, does that bother me? Honestly, not one bit. You can call it the honeymoon phase if you like, but I have zero regrets with this car. It has aggressive good looks, amazing performance, and practical for everyday use, backed by Honda reliability. It just reminds me why I always look back fondly at cars that made driving truly enjoyable. I think Acura didn't just make a sporty car. I think they made something that hits you right in the feels.